Hello and welcome back to the Daily Bible Reading Show. We're looking at Second Kings and chapter 7, and this is verse 3. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die." So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. But if they kill us, then we die. It seems whatever they choose, there's just death waiting for them. If they go back into the city, which is experiencing famine. And that's the backdrop to the story. The Arameans have been surrounding the city and there's just no food. And so these lepers are saying, if we go there, there's no food, we'll definitely die. And then they say, if we stay here, we'll die as well. So the only other option is to walk towards the enemy, the people who want to kill them. He says, if we go there and we surrender, they may spare us and we'll live. But you know what? They might kill us as well and we'll die. So, I guess it's not even a life or death situation. It's like facing a situation whereby you'll certainly die. There's just no life option available. But you know what? What's the worst that can happen? I guess that's what they're saying. These 4 men who are lepers, they're used to dealing with death, being ostracized, dealing with this the situation, this horrible disease called leprosy. And I guess that kind of shapes their life decisions. What's the worst that could happen? It's already so bad. And I wonder if that's familiar for some of us. Well, the situation that we're dealing with is death, certain death. And I guess what happens to these 4 men who are so used to dealing with life and death situations is that, they gain courage. They're bold enough to walk into death. They say they're going to walk towards the Arameans, these guys who want to kill them. They said, they may kill us and we'll die. But they say they may just spare us and we'll live. And I guess what certain death does for us is it frees us to walk and face up to the fear of death. And that's what these 4 lepers do. And let's pick up from verse 5 to see what happens to them as they walk towards the enemy. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army. So they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. That's incredible. This huge army runs away for their lives because they think they're being attacked. God caused them, verse 6, to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army. So they heard this thundering army chasing or approaching them, and they run for their lives. But they also not just hear something, they see something. Verse 6 again, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian king. So what they see are kings, these generals coming to attack them. And it may just be that what you're looking at are these 4 beggars, 4 lepers, 4 hungry, dying men walking towards them. And for some reason, they think these are kings coming to kill them. And just the irony of that. God caused these strong men to suddenly become weak. These fearful men to suddenly become fearful of their own lives. And so they run away from these 4 lepers. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's kind of funny as well. But it's also really, really amazing that God would chase away this huge army with these 4 dying men. So imagine this, we are in the camp with these 4 lepers. And what happens when you reach this camp? Verse 8. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank. Now remember, they're hungry to the point of starvation. They're in a famine. And they see food, and the first thing they do is they just eat and they drink. And it says there, they carried away silver and gold and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. So what did they do? They became rich men, yes, but they also filled their tummies. They took everything they could carry and they hid it away. They couldn't believe their luck. One moment they're hungry, they're destitute, they had no money, they had no friends, but now they had this riches left behind by this army. You left behind even the tents. The thing is, they didn't even pack anything. Everything was just left there as it was. It was there for the taking. And it took it. It took all of it. But then verse 9, something happens. Something happens. Something speaks to them at the level of their conscience. Verse 9. Then they said to each other, we are not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. And I guess, the question is, would we do this? Stumbling across this huge treasure, this amazing news, would we realize that this is not just for us? That back in the city, our own people are starving. Our own people are worried, sick, and they haven't heard this amazing news that there's this life, there's this riches, there's this reward just waiting outside the door. And they say, we will be punished if we don't share this good news. If we wait until daylight, they say, punishment will overtake us. So it's not just a matter of the right and wrong, but now or never. We need to open our mouths. We need to share this good news with those who are hungry, those who are dying. Verse 10, so they went and called out to the city gatekeepers, these 4 lepers. They went out to the gatekeepers and they told them, we went into the Aramean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were. The gatekeeper shouted the news and was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city. Verse 13, one of his officers answered, make some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened. So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, go and find out what has happened. They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. Amazing, isn't it? The news was too good to be true. Even the king could not believe it. The king thought this was a trick. The Arameans know we are starving. They've left it to draw us out. But then one of the officers said, what do we have to lose? See, the officer is kind of like the leper. We're facing death anyway if we don't do anything. So let's send a couple of people who will die anyway if they stay here. Let's send them. Send them to find out what has actually happened. And, at least one person had the sense to just check it out and to see if it was real. And it was. They went there, and it says that the whole road was strewed with clothing. And imagine, this road is not just all in one bunch, but all along the road, they were just throwing off all this stuff. And it shows that they were really running away, and they're just trying to get rid of everything that they had, all their treasures, all their equipment, and I guess, what military men had as equipment, all their swords and their shields. They just threw it on the ground because they were just so afraid for their lives. But as a result, they verified it. It was true. Verse 16, then the people went out and they plundered the camp. So all the people, they heard it, they knew it was true. They went out and they benefited from this. They were blessed by this good news. And I guess that's just the nature of the gospel. At times it can sound too good to be true. I mean, what God has done for us is given us an impossibly good blessing at a time of certain death. And, you could be forgiven for doubting it in terms of its goodness. But still, what's there to lose? Look into it. Find out. Is it really true? Is it really real? And you might just be surprised how it will not just benefit you, but benefit everyone that you love. Verse 17. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold. When the king came down to the house, it happened as the man of God had said to the king, about this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. Verse 19, the officer had said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen? The man of God had replied, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. And that is exactly what happened to him. For the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. How sad, isn't it, to see the blessing with your own eyes, but not to be able to taste it. And that's what happened to this person who doubted. He doubted not just this man's word. It's talking about Elisha, who promised that this would happen, but who doubted God. And in his own words, he said, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? And he was this guy who was the officer, verse 17, who leaned in charge of the gate. I guess he was in charge of opening the gate. He maybe had a position of high authority. And so, he was stationed there, but everyone is so eager, so eager for the food, for the treasure. They just trampled over him. Get out of the way. And they stepped over him and he died. And it wasn't just a tragedy, it was judgment. Elisha said, you will not taste any of this. And that's exactly what happened, verse 20 says. For the people trampled him at the gateway and he died. And again, it's just the tragedy of doubting God's word without even, experiencing God's blessing. And I guess the message here is almost a warning as well. Everything that God says will be true, but will we trust in it before we see it in its fulfillment? One day all of us will see this fulfillment. One day all of us will have it verified, put it that way. We'll know for certain that what God says and everything God says will be true. But I guess the test is, will we believe it today? Will we trust in it today? And will we trust and have this relationship with God who is good, who blesses us in times of famine, who comes to us and speaks to us during times of doubt? Will we trust and will we receive this word of truth today, or will we lose it tomorrow? Well, this is 2 Kings chapter 7, looking at this amazing, amazing miracle that has to do with death and life. These 4 lepers who had no choice but to face death, and it kind of boldened them up. It gave them courage to face death headlong, and they walked into it, and they thought, what's the worst that could happen? But in the process, they received life instead, and there's just so much grace in that. And God offering us life precisely when all that is before us is death. That's salvation. God saving us with impossible odds, but saving us out of death. But secondly, there's God's word. God's word that comes to us that sounds too good to be true. Even a king doubted it. But at least they sent someone to verify it. They checked it out for themselves. And when it was true, really, it's just a testimony to God's generosity and goodness to us. But finally, God's judgment. God's salvation is true, God's salvation is real, but so is God's judgment as well. And his judgment over unbelief, his judgment over untrustingness of God's word today. One day we will see the fulfillment of God's word. But the test is, will we trust in it today? Will we receive God's offer of salvation today? And that's 2 Kings chapter 7. Well, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Daily Bible Reading Show, coming to you live from Cambridge. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and God bless.